Hi, it's Mike from Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To, and on today's video we're taking a look at the BIOS on the NZXT N5 Z690. Now this BIOS is going to be very familiar to those of you that have previously owned ASRock motherboards, as ASRock is pretty much the OEM of these boards from NZXT, at least the majority at the moment in 2023. So we're going to go through today, do a quick BIOS tour, go through some of the key features. We won't be going too in depth into some of the overclocking features, etc. We will touch on them very briefly. As always, if there's anything we don't cover, please let us know in the comment section below and we'll try to expand it either individually with you in the form of the comment section down below, or alternatively you can head over to our Discord and we can go over it in much more depth. So with that out of the way, let's get on and take a look and see what the NZXT BIOS is all about. Okay, so this is the first page that you're going to see when you go into the NZXT BIOS. So this is basically the basic or standard mode. So it gives you pretty much a tour of what is going on. So you've got options here, so you can save and exit once you've made any changes. You can also load your factory defaults. So if you've set anything in here and your PC has become extremely unstable, you can do F9 or click here to do factory defaults. You've also got help information. So if you click on that one, it tells you what keys are what. So obviously if you're trying to navigate without the aid of a mouse, then you can use these keys. Up, down, left, right, tab, enter, F1, etc, etc. You get the general idea. So that is that section. You've also got options for changing your languages, depending on the country of origin. And also you've got the option here for hitting F6 to go into the advanced mode. All of this is actually laid out really nicely, as you'd expect from NZXT. They do a lot of work on actually showing things in their best light. They've got a very good eye for that. So we've got our model number here, and also tells you your processor information, processor speed, and the total of installed memory. Also here it's going to go through to DRAM information and tell you which slots are populated, the current speed they're running at, and also any XMP profile information. If you click on this button here, you can choose between auto or your profile. Auto basically means it's not running a profile, so this is essentially more like a toggle. Now, you'll probably notice that our RAM here, DDR4 3600, but currently is running at 3200. Now, this is the nature of the chipset and also the processor, because it doesn't like supporting more than that without a little bit of instability with this particular setup. We'll talk about that a little bit later when we go into the advanced memory settings. Bottom corner here, storage configuration, so it tells you what is connected to your SATA ports and also any of the 4 M.2 slots. So currently we've got our Lexar SSD on M.21, the rest of them are not populated. Also you've got things for the VMD support here, which is currently disabled. Over here, today's time and date. If you click on that, you can go in and change it, as you can with ASRock motherboards. And over here, temperatures. So CPU temperature, currently running a very nice 31 degrees Celsius. Motherboard temperature, 25.5, so that's running nicely. And it's also telling you your current CPU voltage. Moving down, we've got our fan statuses, and this is actually really handy. They've actually made a really good job of this in my opinion. So you've got your fan status, and you've also got them highlighted. So if there is actually something physically connected, which is actually giving a reading, then it will be highlighted in white. Anything which is grayed out means is not connected, and you will also get the NA sign, which is not applicable. So currently CPU fan is given the RPM readings. Same for System Fan 3 and System Fan 4. Also underneath there, you've got the option for CPU fan setting, and also you've got the option to customize it. So if you click on customize, you can choose between performance mode, full speed mode, silent mode, standard, performance, etc. So you can switch between those. Unfortunately, once you've done that, even if they were set up as custom, on this particular section, you cannot then choose your custom settings again. You do have to go into advanced mode to enable that. Underneath we've got tools, which is essentially just for flashing the BIOS. So you can click on instant flash and it will reboot and go into the BIOS flashing utility. We won't be showing you that on this video. We have done this on a previous video, which we'll link in the video description. Over on the last tab here, we've got our boot priority. So currently our boot priority is set to the Windows Boot Manager on M.2-1, our Lexar boot drive. If you have more drives connected, they will appear here. Whichever one is at the top will be the primary boot device, secondary, third, forth, etc., as the list goes down. So that is pretty much it for the standard setup, this initial first page, which should give you most of the information. But if you want to dive a little bit deeper, then we have to go into advanced mode. So advanced mode again will look very familiar to anyone who's used an ASRock motherboard in the last few years. The layout is very similar, although slightly stylized towards NZXT. So this is the first tab. We'll go through these and there will be timestamps in the video description for each one of these individual tabs. So if you want to fast forward to any one of those, then feel free to do so from the video description. So the first one is the main page, which essentially is just going to replicate what we had in the previous panel. It tells you cache size, processor type, memory, etc. So very basic indeed. Next, we're going to go into the overclocking tab. So here it tells you your processor speeds, etc., B clock, memory target speeds, etc. So you've got options for CPU vCore compensation. You can set to various levels there. You've also got your base frequency boost, so you can actually change this to kind of pretty much whatever you want to. It's going to depend mostly on your processor. You can, if you want to, set it to auto. Realistically, if you've got quite decent cooling, then you can go to the highest level there. So that's 190 watts, which is permitted on this particular board with this processor. This means that it's going to use as much voltage as possible and keep your boost clocks higher for longer. Next up is going to be CPU configuration. So you've got your turbo ratio, you've got other things here like your P-core ratio, you've also got your AVX2 ratio offsets, E-core ratio, CPU cache ratio, and your minimum cache ratio. All of those I would suggest leaving set to auto. You've also got your B clock aware adaptive voltage. We've actually got that enabled, which is the default. You can of course disable that should you want to. With all of these things, if you click on them, it will give you a description over on the right hand panel here. So in this instance, where it says about the B clock aware adaptive voltage, it basically says it can enable or disable the B clock aware adaptive voltage. When enabled, P code will be aware of the B clock frequency when calculating the CPU VF curves. This is ideal for B clock overclocking to avoid high voltage overrides. So there you go. Now you know what it means. Next one is your boot performance mode. So this is essentially going to be for kind of your performance modes. Now I've set this to turbo performance. So this is basically going to be the fastest it can be. If you want to somewhat throttle the system, you can choose the max non-turbo for performance. So this will go to whatever the processor's lowest speed is, or its base clock rather than its turbo speed. And max battery will just keep things very, very slow and try and keep clocks as low as it can for as long as it can. I would suggest setting this to turbo performance. Scrolling on down, so we've got more things you can choose to change here. You've got your ring to core offset ratio, you've got your SAPL frequency. A lot of this stuff is going to be one of those things where you kind of leave it as it is unless you have a specific reason to change it for specific overclocking requirements. We will touch on that a little bit later, but I would say realistically most of these things you're probably best off leaving these set to whatever they are as the factory defaults. Now we've also got things like Intel Speed Step. You can enable or disable that. You've got the Intel Turbo Boost technology, so if you are finding that your processor is getting a little bit toasty, you can always turn off the turbo boost should you wish to. I'm guessing most people are going to want to get the most performance out of this board possible, so leaving most of these enabled is probably going to be the best bet for you. Also, you've got your Intel Thermal Velocity Boost voltage optimizations. Now this you definitely want to have enabled, especially with 13th gen processors. If you have this disabled, you'll find when you're running things like Cinebench, you will get absolutely horrible scores if it's disabled. So make sure that the velocity boost is set to enabled. And again, like I said earlier on, when we've got the section for the wattage that you can have set, then make sure that's set to the highest possible, whereas ours was 190. Also here, we've got things like the tag boost. You can disable that if you want to. You've got your long duration power limit. You can kind of set this to a maximum of 190 if you want to. It kind of works in the same way as the wattage. They are somewhat linked. So yeah, the long duration power limit, you'd think that would be a time, so like 190 seconds, but I don't think it is. I think it's actually 190 watts. So yeah, that relates back to that previous setting we had. Long duration maintained. Again, we've got this set to auto. It will pick up the automatic settings there most of this stuff is going to be pretty much for tweaking systems, and is going to be very specific to the individual processor that you've got actually installed and what it's capable of. But that gives you an idea of what you can actually do in your overclocking settings. A little bit complicated, a lot of it, to be honest with you, but really out of the box it isn't too bad at all. So next up we've got our DRAM configuration. So again, in DRAM it's going to be pretty much the same stuff. So you've got your XMP settings. You can also go in for dynamically boosting your memory, which I would leave that off. You've also got your real-time memory frequency, DRAM reference clock. All of these pretty much leave as they are. The only thing I've changed personally is our DRAM frequency. Again, because I had it set to auto, we're using DDR4 3600, and it didn't like booting with that because there is limitations of this actual processor. So even though it's DDR4 3600, I've set it to 3200 just to keep it nice and stable. Also then, that does run in gear 1, and you've also got your option here for DRAM gear mode. Now, if you're not too sure here, I would suggest setting it to auto. If you put it to gear 1, that is going to give you your best performance. Gear 2, slightly less, and gear 4, worse again. So if you set it to auto, it will try and detect what it wants to. But ideally with these processors, you want to aim, if you can, for memory setting gear 1. That is the optimum setting for RAM in this platform. Moving down, so you've got your timings for the RAM. These are all set to auto. You can, of course, if you want to, set these manually. Type in your CAS latencies, etc. from the actual RAM itself, which you can find out in various programs or from the RAM stick itself or off the box. So leave those to auto unless they're specifically wrong. The same for your secondary timings and your third timings, and all of these things you can configure to your heart's desire should you wish to. Again, realistically, for most people, unless you're actually doing some proper hardcore overclocking, you're probably best off leaving all of this set to auto, other than the fact of actually changing the frequency if you've got RAM which is faster than the platform allows, like we've got here. Next up is going to be the voltage configuration. So currently we are running in OC mode. You've got an option for stable mode, which basically caps everything off, so it just runs less than optimal. OC mode allows you to make some changes here. So currently with our CPU core and cache voltage, we're actually running in offset mode. And you've got the choice there for auto, fix, or offset. Offset is effectively kind of undervolting. So here we've got an offset voltage. Done it quite moderate there, so we're at -25 on the voltage, which does bring the temperatures down, which is quite useful for 12th and 13th gen parts, and potentially 14th gen when they arrive. So you've also got things like your load line calibration, so you can choose what you want there. It's defaults there, shown on the left. Auto is here, so obviously if you want to change your load level calibration, you can choose whichever levels you wish to there for obviously performance. As you can see, your load line calibration, so level 1 is basically the top. So this prevents things like voltage drop or voltage droop, or V droop as it's named. So yeah, lots of settings there you can play with. This is just an overview. I'm not going to tell you what to do on your particular processor because they all do run slightly differently. So kind of you're better off looking up specific guides for your processor, or just seeing what it can do. Tweak the settings, see what works best for you. Also in this, you can choose to save user profile. So if you make some settings here, you can choose a profile, save profiles, etc, etc. In order to do that, scroll down past that level there. You've got save user profile, load profiles. You can also save to disk and save from a disk should you want to. So yeah, pretty handy for overclocking profiles, especially when you do BIOS updates, because if you do a BIOS update, it will basically erase most of your settings. So it's worth saving them to a disk if you possibly can. So next up is going to be advanced. So we've got our CPU configuration. Again, tells you more about your processor, your P-core information, E-core information. You've also got the option to enable hyperthreading, which for some people you may choose to disable for better gaming. You also got your active processor P-cores, currently set to all, with active processor E-cores. Again, the efficiency cores in some gaming instances, it's better to have those disabled, so you can choose to have 0, so that will effectively disable your efficiency cores. Again, I would suggest for most people, unless you have a specific reason not to, set both of those to all to keep all of your processing cores active. CPU C states, this is for power management, so those as enabled for power management. If you're doing extreme overclocking, then you might want to turn off the C states so you can keep a constant voltage or constant settings. Same for the rest of this, so we've got the sleep states, etc. Pretty much the same stuff there, not really a great deal to go over at all. Next one's going to be your chipset configuration. So this is where you may want to change some settings. So your primary graphics adapter, if you're using a multi-graphics setup, especially if you've got a processor with integrated graphics and you're using a graphics card, you may want to decide which one the system actually uses, whether it uses the one in the PCIe slot 1, whether it uses Onboard, or whether it automatically detects based on what monitor is actually plugged in where. Also, very important thing these days, make sure that above 4G decoding is enabled. If you leave that as disabled, then your graphics card will not be able to access any more than 4 GB of RAM. Anything over that will be wasted and will be reflected in benchmarks and obviously gaming performance, so make sure that is enabled. Resizable bar, again, similar sort of deal. A lot of graphics cards these days, especially Intel ones, do rely quite heavily on the resizable bar, so leave that as enabled unless you have a specific reason not to. VTD is the virtualization, so whether or not you can do a virtualized machine. You've also got SR-IOV, so again that is the use of devices via a virtual machine, so whether the I/O is enabled or disabled. If you're not using virtual machines, you might as well leave that as disabled. You also got your DMI link speed, so ideally you want that set to Gen 4 to give you the most bandwidth possible on this platform. And also your PCI Express individual slots, so 1 through to 5. You can also as well choose whichever speed it is. Now PCI Express link speed, we've also got the option for Gen 5, actually on the graphics card slot. So if you've got a Gen 5 graphics card, when they actually come out, you can change that. Again, if you set it to auto, you should get the best performance. If you're not entirely sure, some modern cards are Gen 4, some are Gen 3, or if you're using some form of PCI Express riser card for actually mounting your graphics card vertically, if you've got an older cable, you may want to set that manually to Gen 3 so that the signaling is better and you don't get blue screens, etc. Otherwise, like I said, all those you can set to auto. Maybe if you've got a very old PCI Express card in one of the slots, you might want to change it to kind of PCI Express Gen 1 or something. Again, the options will be different for each slot depending on what it is capable of. So like slot 3 is capable of Gen 4, slot 4 only maxes out at Gen 3. So again, that will give you some idea of what your slots are actually capable of. PCI Express native control, currently we've got this set to enabled. Normally this would be set to disabled, but because we're using an Intel graphics card for power management reasons, we have to enable that. And also our PCI Express ASPM support is set to level 1. Again, the Intel graphics cards do like that for reducing the actual usage of power in Windows. Normally this would be set to disabled, as with the rest of them. Again, depending on your graphics card, you may or may not need to enable or disable these sections. Next up, this section is going to be quite useful to some of you. Again, if you're using the integrated graphics, you've got the option for shared memory. The shared memory buffer for the onboard graphics on Intel processors at present currently maxes out at 1 gig. So I've allocated the entire 1 gig. You can, of course, set it to auto should you wish to, but I've set it to the maximum. Also, we've got the option here for iGPU multi-monitor. Now, in my particular setup, I am using 2 monitors, one of which is built into the case, one of which is my dedicated screen. So I have iGPU multi-monitor enabled, so I can run Windows from one monitor and run other things from basically the other monitor. So choose whichever you want. If you're only using a single monitor and you're plugging into a graphics card, you might as well disable iGPU multi-monitor. Next up, we've got the onboard LAN. So this is the Realtek RTL8125BG. This is currently set to enabled. Obviously, if you don't want your LAN enabled, you can disable it. I'm not sure why you'd want to, but you can do. Same for onboard HD audio. If you're using a separate DAC or something, you can disable that. And also your front panel audio. If you've got a very, very old case, you can set it to AC97, but otherwise HD is the one you want selected. And also you've got the option for onboard HDMI audio. So that is basically transferring the audio from your onboard graphics via the HDMI and basically getting your audio into your monitor. You can choose enabled or disabled. Onboard WAN device. So you can choose for your wireless devices, you can choose that to be enabled or disabled. And also you've got things like the sleep section, so deep sleep you can have enabled if you want to. Restore on AC power loss, power on or power off. I've got it set to power off. And also you've got your G&A device there. Next up, storage configuration. So again, SATA controllers, you can enable or disable those. Your SATA mode selection, only the option for AHCI on here. You've also got the hybrid storage detection and configuration, which you don't really need enabled unless you've got specific reasons, if you're setting up some sort of RAID or something. And also you've got your link management for SATA and hard disk smart. VMD, so this is your virtual disks. And also again, it goes through and show you all of your connected disks again, as we were looking at a little bit earlier. Next up, NVMe configuration. This is going to be the same sort of deal. So if you've got more drives connected, you'll see more here, but it basically tells you about your drives. You can't do anything to them, but it just does show you them. So if for some reason it's not visible in Windows, you can go into your BIOS, check in here. If it's visible here, it's connected. Maybe you need to just initialize the drive. Next up is your ACPI, or this is basically power management. So suspend to RAM, you can set to either enabled or disabled or auto. PCIe devices power on, so you can choose to power by PCIe. RTC alarm power on, so you can choose whether or not this is enabled or by the operating system. You've also got the option for USB keyboard remote power on. This is actually one of those things which I had a conversation with somebody a little while ago about a ASRock motherboard where the feature was there, but it was removed when they actually changed it for another board, I think it was. And they really loved the fact that they could turn on their PC from their USB keyboard. So this is something that actually I don't think I've ever used. Normally I just use like Wacom mouse or something. But anyway, the options here, so you can turn on your device from off using the USB mouse or keyboard, which potentially could be quite cool. Next up, we've got our USB configuration. So it basically tells you about the settings, what's connected, and your XHIO handoff. This is for devices which don't support it, so you can leave that enabled or disabled. Won't really make a great deal of difference with Windows 10 or Windows 11. Trusted computing, this is something which some of you may want to have to do or actually disable. So this is the FTPM or TPM. So this supports TPM 2.0 via firmware of the processor, and you've got the option to have it enabled or disabled. If you're installing Windows 11, you will have to have this enabled unless you use some sort of patch or dodgy version of Windows to get installed. If you're finding that you can't install Windows for some reason, make sure that security device support is set to enabled. Next up, we've got the UEFI configuration or UEFI. So this is, UEFI is basically your BIOS. So you've got the option for which one you go into first of all. So if you don't like easy mode and you want to go straight into advanced mode, when you go into the BIOS, you can choose that here. You've also got the active page on entry. So if you want to, you can go straight into overclocking or any of those things, very much like they do on ASRock boards normally. And also you've got the option for full HD UEFI. Some monitors for some reason don't support full HD. You can set to auto or disabled, in which case it will reduce the resolution to 1224 by 768. Currently it's running at 1920 by 1080, but we're upscaling to 4K. So the next one is going to be the tools. So here we've got some pretty basic tools. So secure erase tool for the SSDs or for NVMEs for sanitization. Don't think I've ever needed to use those at all. You also got the UEFI update utility. So this will take you into either Instant Flash or Intel's management engine interface flash. And you can click on either one of those and you can flash the BIOS effectively. You'll need to have it on a USB stick. Again, covered that in a separate video. So that's it for tools. Next is PC monitoring. This is the one I think a lot of you are probably going to want to know about. If you don't want to use the NZXT CAM software, then you will need to use this to configure your fans to set them up to a specific level. So first of all, at the top it gives you all your temperatures, so motherboard temperature, CPU, fan, blah, 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 all that kind of stuff. So it gives you readouts, and also might be useful some of this, your voltages, to see where your voltages are. Make sure your 5 volt rail, 12 volt rail and all that are stable. So currently our 12 volt is bang on 12, our 5 volt is just a shade under, so 4.99, and our 3.3 is at 3.328. So just slightly under on both of those, but certainly within tolerances. The next part is going to be fan tuning. So this is going to essentially replicate through all of them. They're all going to be the same sort of deal. So you've got all the individual system fans as you scroll down through. So depending on how many system fans you've got on your motherboard, if you're not using the exact same one, you may see more or you may see less depending on what you've got. So we'll concentrate on three main ones. So we'll do the CPU fan, the AIO pump, and the system fan. I think that's going to be enough. We don't need to go through the others. So the first thing you probably want to do is do fan tune in. So you can click on that and it will basically make all of your fans go as fast and as slow as they can and test the RPM ranges, etc. So that will give you your kind of baselines for what the fans can actually do. Otherwise, you can just go in and choose things. So you can also choose what they're for. So this one here, CPU fan, you can click on that and you can, if you want to, set it to water pump. So it's a water pump header. If you want to, I wouldn't bother because you've got an AIO pump one there, which will do the same thing. It's unlikely you're going to have two water pumps, but you never know. You can set what your fans are. So if you're not too sure what your fans are, these are, well, the ones we've got are 4-pin, so that is going to be PWM. If it's a 3-pin fan, it's likely to be DC. If you set it to auto, you may get unexpected results. So I would definitely recommend coming in here and actually setting them manually to whatever they are. Now currently the CPU fan setting here, like I said earlier, we had 4 options of silent mode, standard, performance and full speed. But we've now got option to actually go into customize. So let's go into customize. Actually, we'll do, first of all, we've got your fan step up and step down. So the step up times you can choose here from level 0. So that is going to do it very fast. If you do it for level 9, it will do it very slow, or vice versa. I can never remember which it is, so I just set them for level 5 because that is the defaults. So anyway, let's go into customize. So then we get a much more expanded section, which is actually a little bit easier to control in the NZXT CAM software. Again, we've done a video on that. I will link that in the video description if you want to check that out. But this, all these settings, if you change them in here, they will be active until Windows loads if you've got CAM. If you've installed NZXT CAM, immediately as that runs in Windows, it will override the settings that are in the BIOS, just so you're aware of it. So you don't necessarily need to do this if you've set up NZXT CAM. But for those that don't want to use CAM, then this is how to do it. So you can set your temperatures. So you've got 4 individual settings. So temperature 1, temperature 2, temperature 3, temperature 4. And you can set a duty or a fan duty. So that is a percentage. So as you can see here, temperature at 30 degrees is fan duty 1. Temperature 2 is 50 degrees Celsius. That is going to be fan duty 2%. At 70 degrees, we go up to 100%, and again temperature 4, 70 degrees, 100%. So this is reflecting what we've actually done in the CAM software. If you want to, you can change this. So if we say temperature 1, we're going to set for 25 degrees Celsius, and then we'll do our fan duty, maybe we'll say 5%, and then temperature 2, we'll say 45 degrees Celsius, and we'll set that to maybe 10%. Now obviously, setting these is going to be a lot easier to do in the CAM software because you can drag the sliders up and work out the noises for yourself to see which works for you. So 70 degrees, we're going to go for, let's go for 85%. And then temperature 4, we'll go for 80 degrees because we don't want to go any higher than that. And that will max out. So on our critical temperature for the CPU is 100 degrees. So hopefully that makes sense. So you've basically got a temperature setting and a fan percentage setting. So it's not RPM, it's just a percentage. So if it's 1000 RPM, your fan total, 5% will be whatever it is. It will be a percentage. So 10% would be 100 RPM for 1000 RPM fan. Yeah, it's been a long day. Anyway, so you get the general idea there. Next one is going to be our AIO pump. So we've got this set to AIO pump, even though we haven't got, or you can have water pump. Now there isn't going to be a great deal of difference between the two, but I've got it set to AIO pump. When you choose AIO pump, because AIOs are DC or AC, you can choose which it is, or auto. So if you've got a PWM AIO, which is kind of unlikely these days, but you never know, you can choose that, or DC mode. Again, DC mode is 3-pin, PWM is 4-pin. And you've also got your pump settings. So you've got standard mode, like we had before. You can do customize or full speed. Some people prefer just do full speed, but if you want to, again, you can choose your pump settings based on temperatures, like we did in Customize before. So you've got your different levels there, step ups, temperatures, etc, etc. You've also got allow fan stop. You never want your AIO pump to stop. That's generally a bad thing, so a fan stop is disabled there. Next one's going to be your system fans. Again, this is going to be the same sort of deal. So again, you can choose whether it's set as a fan or a water pump. If you set it to a fan, you can do the same sort of thing. So you can do your control mode, set it to PWM if it's a PWM fan. If it's a DC fan, set it to DC. It's yeah, pretty much the same sort of stuff. You've got the options there for your mode. Again, you can customize it, or you can just set it to silent, and it will set up its own silent profile. The choice effectively is up to you. And I think that is pretty much it for fan control. Yeah, not really much more I can show you there. Again, if this isn't entirely clear, please do get in touch on our Discord and I will try and help you through it. And if you can send pictures of what you have on your screen, that makes life a little bit easier. So that is PC monitoring. Next is going to be security. So again, you can set up a supervisor or user password for the BIOS to gain access to the system if you want to. You also got secure boot. So if you are using Windows 11, you will need to have secure boot enabled and just set it to standard mode unless you have a reason otherwise. Then you've got your Intel Platform Trust Technology. So that is basically enabling or disabling that for your TPM. So this is how to enable TPM on your motherboard. So choose enabled there. If you need TPM for Windows 11 or Windows 10 maybe. And also you've got basically certificates you can add to your hard drive. Basically that is kind of encryption if you wanted to. Pretty much it for security. In boot, again, you've got our boot option priorities. You've got your fast boot, boot from onboard LAN. So if you're booting from onboard LAN, you can do from here. And also you've got your setup prompt timeout, numlock status, whether you want that on or off, boot beep. Actually, I'm going to turn that on, so I kind of like the sound of that. The full screen logo, whether or not you want the NZXT logo on the screen when the system boots up, entirely up to you. And the add-on ROM display as well. You've also got the boot failure guard message. So if for some reason the system fails to boot a certain number of times, then it will come up on the screen and it will restore your default settings back to whatever it was when the BIOS was flashed. So you'll lose all of your settings, your XMP settings, your fan settings, all that stuff will be gone. So you can set that. I would suggest setting that a little bit higher than usual. So 4 reboots I think is probably enough for you to get in between that and press the delete key if it doesn't boot the first or second time. But if you go past, actually I'm going to change that to 6. So if it doesn't boot for 6 times, it will then erase the BIOS effectively and reset it back to defaults. Next one is going to be CSM. So if you've got older system or older parts in your system, like an old graphics card, an old hard drive that you've dug out of an old system and put in, and for some reason it's not visible or it won't allow you to boot, you may want to turn on CSM. Windows 10 and Windows 11 are both UEFI operating systems, so ideally you want to not have CSM enabled because it does kind of drag the system back into the Stone Age a little bit, but certainly if you want to, you can do. Yeah, there you go. CSM is disabled. To enable CSM, please install an external graphics card, because the graphics card that we've got doesn't support CSM, so we have no ability to do that. That is something slightly more unique to Intel graphics cards at the moment, because they 100% do not support CSM, which can be potentially a problem. So there is that. Then the last one, the last tab is going to be exit. So here is basically where we wrap things up. So you've got the option for saving changes and exiting. So if you're happy with the changes you've made, you can do that now. If you're not too sure and you think you may have made things worse, you can discard those changes and exit. You can discard changes and go back in, or you can just go back to load your defaults. So if for some reason you've come onto our Discord and we've said, look, yeah, you've obviously got something not quite right there, have you reset your defaults on your motherboard? This is what we mean. So when it says load UEFI defaults, this basically means load your BIOS defaults, which are the same kind of as removing your BIOS battery. Obviously, if you can't get into the BIOS, you can't do that, but if you can, then this is a way to do it. You've also got the option for launching a EFI shell, and also you've got your boot override. So if you've got multiple drives here, say if you've got a USB stick in here, you can click on one of these drives and that will be the next drive that it boots from. But other than that, I think that is pretty much it for this tour of the NZXT BIOS. So there we go. Sorry, it's a long video. There is quite a lot to get through there. I will try and skim through it, and if there's anything irrelevant, I will try and remove it. But I think from a lot of people, the fan control is going to be very important, and obviously things like installing Windows 11, the secure boot, TPM, and all that kind of stuff is going to be very relevant. So hopefully this is helpful to some of you out there with an NZXT motherboard. I know it's going to be a very small amount of you because there aren't a lot of you out there that actually have these boards, but I figured, well, no one else has done a tour on the NZXT BIOS, so I figured it would be time someone did. Now, obviously, like I said before, this tour is for the N5 Z690 that we've got here. Your board may be slightly different, so there may be some subtle changes. Again, if there are, do let us know. Do our best to help you out. Although, actually, NZXT have got a fantastic support website, which does go through basically the motherboard BIOSes in quite a lot of detail, actually, in pages. So potentially that might be worth taking a look at as well. Also, so anyway, I've rattled on for way too long. Hopefully this video has been useful. If it has, smash the like button. If you want to see more content like this on a daily basis, hit subscribe and the chime notification. It'll be notified of future video releases. But for now, I've been Mike. This is Mike's Unboxing Reviews and How To. And hopefully we'll catch you in the very next video. Thanks for watching.